I hereby introduce to you Mr. Michael Veazey.
Ladles and jelly spoons, he says, nicking his favourite introduction from Tim Ferriss, shamelessly. This is Michael Veazey from Amazing FBA. I'm delighted today to welcome a member from the 10K Collective, which is a mastermind that I run in London. It's been running since September. And one of our most active and keen members, Ashley Pearce, has agreed to come on the show and talk through his experiences as an Amazon seller. So delighted to welcome you to the show, Ashley. Warm welcome.
Hi, Michael. Thank you very much for having me on. I've been really excited about this, actually, since you you put it on the table for me to come on. And I'm glad to be the first one, the crash test dummy, so
excellent,
so to speak.
Excellent. Well, it's not quite that tough a job description, but I like the fact that you're up for that. Good man. So first of all, actually, tell us a bit about your story. So this is the traditional question, but the difference is you're not kind of a sort of a guru type person who's putting themselves out there as made billions yet, or offering the most amazing software ever, which is a refreshing change. So, but nevertheless, the usual question: what's your background and how do you get started with Amazon?
Cool. Well, essentially, I heard about the Amazon FBA program through the John Lee DeMass Entrepreneur on Fire podcast in the States. Scott Volker was actually on that podcast in December of 2015, I believe it was. And I was at the time looking for potential revenue streams, cash flow revenue streams, because I was in the middle of starting another business. And essentially it sounded too good to be true, as it typically does when you hear about these things. But I kind of started digging into it and started to do the numbers and concentrate on the data. I'm quite data heavy. And it started to make sense. And essentially, I put together about £8,000 to get myself started. I spent a good few months doing some product research. I learned firsthand that Chinese New Year is quite a nightmare when it comes to launching products, and kind of suffered the wrath of that month delay between my sampling and my first orders. But nonetheless, it was a learning experience. And essentially, that took me then until the end of August, beginning of September in 2016. To get a product launched in the United States. So that was exclusively on .com, exporting from China.
So just sum up for us a bit then. So some interesting stuff already. So you thought it was a bit too good to be true, but you looked at the numbers. So you're data-led. So that's an interesting point. That is quite a data-led sort of business model, I suppose, in some ways. We'll come back to that if we may later. But so just summarize for us. So how long did it take really from you finding out about this to taking action? And how long did it take from when you started taking action to making your first real sales on Amazon?
So I'm kind of, I work with the mindset of you need to implement at the speed of thought, because if you don't move that quickly, the world will, and you'll be chasing the next bright light that comes along. So essentially, I took action immediately. It was that afternoon when I heard about it. I started actually digging into the numbers, actually looking on Alibaba.com, on Amazon.com, checking BSRs. Back then, Jungle Scout was about, but in essence, I did it the old-fashioned way with an Excel spreadsheet, 24 hours onwards from the previous day, checking the BSR to see where the approximate sales were. So that was really back when it was difficult. People don't know how easy it is in comparison with the tools that are available out there now.
Okay, I like it. So you action at the speed of thought. That's wow. That sounds like it doesn't just sound like an Amazon course guru statement. That sounds like a book. So yeah, we heard it here first, folks. You better trademark that quickly. That's an amazing phrase. So just how many months was it, in fact, then, from your action at the speed of thought to actually getting your first product selling on Amazon?
So it took me until, and I remember this, very, very clearly. My first order was actually placed with my supplier 2 days before I got married. So everything was going pretty crazily up to that date, as you can well imagine, with all the preparations for the wedding. And in the meantime, I'm in the last minute negotiations and transfer and bank transfer negotiations with the supplier. And that was in April 2016, beginning of April 2016. Obviously, then there's the supplier lead time, and in reality, then it took me to the end of August to get that shipment into Amazon. So all in all, it was around 9 months. I think you've previously quoted that as being a kind of nominal number. I don't believe I could have gone much quicker from a standing start. I probably spent a couple of weeks in December actually, like I say, pinching myself and making sure actually what was being said on various podcasts and on various blogs was actually true, because I always feel like there's some hidden factors in there. But yeah, 9 months was the lead time there.
Great. Okay. So you mentioned hidden factors. And by the way, yes, 9 months is not an untypical time. I say to people like, if you make a plan for it, and I'm just busy trying to write an online course, and I say to people, 6 months is kind of on paper quite possible, and even quicker than that, but you should allow 4 to 8 months is the number I give. So yeah, 9 months isn't untypical. I think that was about what it took me as well when I first started out. So yeah, it's a good number, and thank you for that reality check there as well. It's not overnight stuff. Tell me about this hidden factors thing. I know what you mean when somebody says, here's this amazing business model, it looks too good to be true. There must be something hidden. Between what you heard with, say, Scott Volker on John Lee Dumas, since you mentioned him, I'll mention it back, or anyone else out there, and what you did, what would you say, if any, were the hidden factors that they hadn't discussed that you wish you'd known when you first went into it?
So it's a really good question, because I feel like you continue to discover what some of these hidden factors are, even as you move into your second and third year of business. But in essence, back then, my general understanding of what these guys were doing from a sourcing, logistics, e-commerce perspective sounded pretty straightforward. Some of the aspects of digital marketing, some of the aspects of kind of search engine optimization, and there was a lot of talk around. It was the prime time in beginning of 2016, talking about the growth of product launch platforms and the evolution of new launch strategies. And I mean, they continue to go on now, but in essence, back then it was very new and frontier led. But some of the people who were podcasting or writing their blogs, I always had this feeling that they either had some sort of, I don't know, from a finance perspective, maybe a rich uncle, from a product development perspective, maybe some deeper contacts in China than they were probably letting on to, and maybe leveraging the scale of another business that was in the family, something like that. Or somebody, they have an inside track into a big retailer, and actually those types of hidden factors are actually can be the hidden success factors that a lot of these guys actually have in their place. Further to that, I think one of the biggest hidden success factors that a lot of guys were talking about back in early 2016, or weren't talking about, were the fact that in essence, Amazon was getting more difficult. And back in 2013, 14, 15, it sounded like you could pretty much throw anything up on Amazon.com and get rich overnight. And they were talking about a time that had very much passed. And this was something I was quite conscious of, and I kind of took to heart when I entered into the market. So I read between the lines and actually listened to some podcasts and some blogs where actually there was a lot of brand-led thinking, as opposed to just throwing something up that you can buy from a wholesaler in China. So naturally, I had that built-in mindset of differentiation from the outset, and I think that's quite key. I think a lot of people who entered into the market in 2016 possibly could have been hearing the 2015 version of events, and actually, as 2016 evolved, the market got very challenging for people who didn't quite have the brand-led sort of mindset.
Excellent. So there's a couple of very, very important things there. I mean, first of all, I think you're right. There often is a hidden success factor, and I suppose is what Chris Rawlings was on the podcast the other day. Who's he probably started off around the 2015 mark, something like that, but back in reasonably early days. But you're right. In 2013, 14, you could throw up things that were pretty grim on Amazon and get away with it. And those days are past. I can tell you that, because I was kind of on the tail end of the putting the old crap up and it'll sell stuff, because I did some of that and it did sell. Having said that, it wasn't very profitable because it wasn't very differentiated. So that's the first thing I would say. Differentiating between sales and profit is very, very important. I mean, Amazon will sell stuff for you all day long if you price it low enough, but isn't necessarily profitable. So you're right about differentiation being important, but also the success factor, the X factor, I think is something important to be explicit about up front. And rather than sort of being puritanical and go, well, of course they did well because they had an inside track to a big retailer. I'm like, well, that's good. What's your X factor? So Chris Rawlings said for him, for example, he did CAD design, computer aided design. He was fluent with that, so he could draft out pretty quickly a new product for development. So that was his, like, if you like, unfair advantage. The only thing is he said it, so we know what was his inside track advantage. And I really think it's important to have one. In fact, rather than being puritanical about it, okay, well, what do you know that other people don't? So, Ashley, what was your X factor? What was the thing that put you unfairly ahead of the game?
So for me, my background, I'm actually an engineer by trade, manufacturing and mechanical engineer. I actually did business management alongside that at the University of Warwick in the Midlands in the UK. So I'd been working in an engineering environment for quite a number of years across aerospace, automotive sectors, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, oil and gas plants and refineries and things like that. Basically, lots of dangerous stuff that could kill lots of people. So I was very used to, in the product development cycles, quite stringent requirements, CE marking, for instance, and the inspection requirements and third-party liaison that needed to happen. So when I entered into the product development cycle, it was kind of second nature. Right, okay, let's draft a specification. Let's put a request for quotation out to the suppliers. Let's structure that request for quotation in a manner that means that I can process this data in a structured manner. And in essence, that broke down a number of barriers and straight away discounted a number of suppliers in the supply chain who didn't want to play ball with that sort of methodology. So my mentality going into it, I didn't even need to really think about it, and that's the unfair advantage, if you like, because that wasn't a learning thing for me. That was something that I went straight into. And even on top of that, within that kind of broad base that I just explained as the industries that I've worked in, actually the capacities I've worked in have been contractual, commercial, sourcing, purchasing, as well as design-led. So in essence, I had quite an unfair advantage, so I feel a bit bad about it.
Well, that's terrible. You should feel really bad that you came in well equipped to do a job. Well, I mean, joking aside, I mean, first of all, you have even more abilities than I'd gathered in the 10K Collective, which just goes to show the value of interviewing people, because they reveal all sorts of stuff. I mean, we all talk a lot at the 10K Collective, and there's a lot of competence in the room. I think you'd agree. There's a lot of very sharp people sharing a lot of, unfair advantages, and it's a fantastic little group. I love it. The dynamic is amazing now. And I'm just saying that, I'm not trying to sell anyone into it, but I just think it's a fact, right? So any members of the group probably would agree, because they've stuck at it for several months now and people are there. But coming back to that, what you just said, I really think I would say to anyone, if you don't have an X factor that puts you a bit ahead of the curve, why are you going into this business in the first place? And I honestly think I would put it as brutally as that, because for example, there's somebody that I know who's just getting started with Amazon. He's got a jewelry making background. Now, I'm not going to reveal anything more about her, but that doesn't mean that she should sell jewelry. But if she went into that sector, she would have an unfair advantage over someone like me, who hasn't got a clue what beautiful design looks like, never mind how to make it, or what the manufacturing implications are, or how expensive or cheap certain materials are, or how fiddly it is to make something. So, given the choice, she should consider going into that, because it gives an unfair advantage. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think we should be looking for that unfair advantage in ourselves. So tell me a bit more. I mean, obviously you've got an incredible background for it. No wonder you've done well. But what would you say then, coming back to you, treating you as the expert in those various different things, what would you say are the things that you came with that helped you with your Amazon business, that you could put in simple terms for people starting out, that they should do, that most people wouldn't think to do, and for you was second nature?
There's one thing that in particular springs to mind, and again, it's I had a discussion with somebody earlier this week about this, and his response was, nobody's saying that. so I was like, maybe I need to bring that up on the podcast. In particular, it's around the sourcing element. So the business that I was in the middle of setting up and starting up when I found the Amazon FBA program and started looking at it is a platform called Manufacturing Network. I'm going to go as far as to say it's like Alibaba for the UK manufacturing supply chain. It really isn't Alibaba for the manufacturing supply chain, but that'll probably be as much of a reference point as you can make from that. And the essence of that is that you can search for manufacturing processes in the UK and find suppliers who have manufacturing processes and combinations of processes. Now, that's not searching based on products. Now, Alibaba doesn't give you this feature or functionality, but one of the key things that gave to me was the knowledge of manufacturing processes. I mean, I'm a manufacturing mechanical engineer anyway, but that business really honed those skills of understanding the manufacturing process.
Okay, so can you put that in? Because I know engineers kind of move in this world of numbers and precision that is hard for them to think outside to stupid people like myself, I would include, by the way, who don't think that way. So can you give us some very, very simple examples of what you mean by the difference between a process and a product when you're looking for a manufacturer?
Of course, yeah. So a product might be, let's go for a fidget spinner, why not? A process, now a fidget spinner could actually be manufactured by several processes. One major one is probably injection molding, but I have seen a few CNC machined versions. I've seen
what is CNC machine? I have a raw no 3-letter abbreviations on this.
No problem. Computer numerical controlled machines. So
now I wish I hadn't asked. What does that mean?
Basically, a sharp tool hits a block of metal and shapes it into whatever you need it to.
Thank you. That's a good explanation for the dumb people like myself out here. Yeah, who know nothing about manufacturing.
And that, like you say, lends itself to the whole thinking of an unfair advantage. It's second nature to me, and it's a second language. In essence, though, the product versus process thing it is quite a change in mindset. It's not just about physically looking at a page and trying to see some words come out of the page. So the example I'd give on Alibaba, for instance, would be that you can actually go to an Alibaba storefront or company page, I think they're called on Alibaba. And in essence, you'll see an array of products. Now, if every one of those products is made from plastic, just as a complete newbie kind of looking at it, you can pretty much be sure, that those products are all being manufactured in one place by one manufacturer. It could still be an agent, that storefront, but in essence, they could be acting on behalf of one manufacturer. And what might seem weird about that storefront is one product is a plastic cup, another product is a plastic fidget spinner, another product is a plastic chair. They don't seem to link together necessarily as a product family, but what connects those items is actually the manufacturing process behind them. And that's quite a key differentiator in trying to find the guys who are actually quite serious factories and quite serious agents for those factories. Because the opposite would be to find a storefront that specialized in cups. They might sell ceramic cups. They're made via some ceramic molding or ceramic firing process. Then there's plastic cups, plastic injection molding, maybe a bit of vacuum forming. Then there might be metal cups, which are plated, and that's a completely different ballpark, completely different set of suppliers and supply chains and compliance requirements to boot. So that was the bit that allowed me to cut through a lot of the crap, if you like, when I first was looking at suppliers on Alibaba. And it's something that I hadn't realized actually was quite a key factor in how I did it in the first place. And like I say, the guy I was speaking to earlier this week said, nobody's saying that. So I thought I definitely need to bring that up.
Yeah, well, that's a very exciting, because I remember you bringing that up in the group, and sorry to everyone else in 10K Collective for spreading, Ashley's wisdom a bit. But the fact is, most people don't take action on anything. So it's only going to be a small percentage of people that actually do anything about this. But I think that when you said that was an immediate light bulb moment for me, because I thought, it's such a logical and immediately obvious thing that it makes such a lot of sense, really. But yeah, like you said, people don't tend to think in those ways, and it's certainly not something else I've heard out there in the Amazon space. To be honest, this sounds terribly hypocritical, but I don't tend to listen to Amazon podcasts these days. I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I tend to listen to things by the big business thinkers because I do think that's part of the wins. But sometimes specifics really matter, and this is one of those things. So you heard it here first, folks, if you haven't heard it out there. So that makes a lot of sense. So you've already implied about how people can, ordinary mortals like myself that don't have an engineering background or mindset can try and dig for that. Are there any other hints for somebody, ordinary person to find a way of finding what people's production capabilities are, if that's the right word, rather than the products that they make?
Yeah, 100%. The most simplistic way of breaking it down, you don't need to be a manufacturing process expert. You don't really need to know how they're manufactured. But in essence, if you're finding an Alibaba company page where all the products are of a particular material, that's a really good indicator. That doesn't guarantee anything from a process perspective, but if they're all the same material, typically you're working either with a factory or an agent that's dedicated, or at least a serious agent who's working with a factory. Interesting.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. So thank you. So your X factor is now becoming slightly less X, but so the next question I've got is a simple one, which a lot of people will ask about when they're starting out. So how long ago did you start then? If we're in May 2018, for anyone who's listening to this several months down the line or even years, there are people who listen to my first episodes, like, from 2015. And I sometimes think, well, I wonder if I should even keep them up, because a lot of that information will have changed, as you said, but the people do listen down the line. So if it's 2020, hello future. And so at this point, how long have you been selling for, Ashley, on Amazon?
So yeah, at this point, we hit the September 2016. That was right. Sorry, I was just trying to recall when because the years seem to fly by.
They do.
So it was a year up to September, 4 months. So
I made that a year and 8 months.
A year and 8 months?
Yeah, excellent. Or you can say, 20 months, which sounds even better. But so the next question is then, did you see this as a replacement for the day job? And what's your relation to that? Because a lot of people come to me and the classic pitch is, for any internet marketing thing, is like, there's a picture of a guy on the beach with a laptop, and then, you two can be free of your day job within 6 months. Has that been the reality? And is that something you wanted?
Well, I tried Wi-Fi on the beach, but it was rubbish. So I came back to Northampton instead. No, it hasn't been a reality. And my job, I'm actually quite privileged in the role that I have, in the job that I have. I work for a company called Productive that specializes in the basically bringing technological products to market, with assisting innovators in basically making a product. So you might see some parallels there between what I do at home and what I do in my day job. In essence, when I first started out in the Amazon space, I was full time with my role in Productive, and I was basically doing this as a side gig. If anything, my workload got greater at work as well as on the Amazon side. So it's not something that's kind of weaned off. It didn't in 2017. In 2018, I've gone part-time, but again, it's still quite a busy and demanding job, still a very rewarding job, to work with very, very capable engineers, far more capable than I am as an engineer. But I get to work with them on the market entry strategies, market validation plans, and those side of things, as well as the engineering. Obviously, I can't forget that side of things. So my job has this kind of interesting symbiosis with what I'm doing outside of work, which has this funny benefit in both directions, because I get a lot of access in work to understanding how we're dealing with bringing funding into businesses, venture capital, grant funding, business angel funding, bank funding, and working with the customers to pitch for cash. So I get a lot of insight into what's working, what's not working, and how it's working. But on the flip side, I bring the market launch and market validation thinking to the table for these innovative products as well. So there's kind of, like I say, a symbiosis between the two. Unfortunately, there is only one of me, so the amount of time that actually I have to dedicate to both is quite significant. So that's a current challenge, I would say. But coming back to your original question, are you on the beach yet? I'm certainly not. And in essence, I don't really ever envisage myself living that type of lifestyle. I want the freedom side of things. I want to develop a lifestyle, but I anticipate that lifestyle having some key elements in it. And yeah, what that looks like in the future, I do not know just yet. But it's a case of taking the opportunities that come to you. Amazon is a great opportunity, but there are also opportunities out there in the world. So I'm certainly not one of these guys who's given up his career 100% just yet.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being honest about that. And I think also Amazon is amazing, and Amazon can also be pretty tough as well, as we all know who've been around the block a bit. I mean, if you get your account suspended, it isn't fun. And we all know people, if you've been around for long enough, especially the bigger accounts, can be more vulnerable to suspension, and then there's a lot at stake as well. On the other hand, you don't want to miss out on Q4 in Amazon, where you can make crazy money, and we all know people that, especially in 10K Collective, that make out like bandits, as they say. So I think having a second income stream to Amazon, or treating Amazon as a second income stream to something else, is a very wise approach. And then of course you've got the whole how do you spend your time question, which is an ongoing fight, right? But the idea that you will be happy sitting around on the beach just comes from burnt out people who need to take a holiday, I think. And sometimes I feel like that, and my wife does as well. And I think the solution is a holiday rather than giving up the idea of working. And the idea of passive income is only, I think, seriously attractive if you're just overworked. I think the idea of being passive is a strange thing to do. As Tim Ferriss used to say, the whole idea of retirement is extremely flawed, because most people are never going to get to that point because they're not capable. And if you're capable enough of building up a business to the point where it runs on its own, and you sit around on the beach doing nothing for more than 3 weeks, you're going to want to put bike spokes in your eyes. So it doesn't work either. Yeah. So
yeah, no, it's been really, really interesting, actually. And one of the key points from the 10K Collective around mindset side of things is that actually, you feel a bit weird that actually you get up in the morning on the days that you have off, and you actually want to do the work that's sat in front of you. You actually feel eager, and it's motivating, it's driving. You feel like you're achieving something. So why would you want to rob yourself of that by not having that involvement and that drive? And I felt like that was a little bit of an individual mindset, but actually what I find is that's more the dominant mindset of the successful guys out there.
Absolutely. I mean, the successful guys are in the game for the game almost. I mean, yeah, they measure it by it's just like a good sports person. They measure their success by the money, just like you measure the success of your playing by the score. And the score doesn't lie. You either won or lost, and you play your part in the team, or you didn't play it and whatever. But they want to win, but I mean, the score is a score of how well they're winning rather than the reason for doing it, I think, for a lot of real entrepreneurs. And I think people vary on that scale. I mean, some people are more passive income driven, than others, but I agree with you that actually even that mentality is always a red flag to me. I mean, sometimes I get, especially with newbies, they come along and they say, well, I just want passive income. And I try and dig a bit below the surface, because I always feel that's a sort of reason to not do a day job rather than a reason to do an Amazon business or build any kind of business, really. Mm-hmm. So interesting to hear you reflecting that back as well, because that definitely reflects my experience of serious entrepreneurs, and also my own nature as well. I want to begin there making stuff happen, because that, I don't know why, it floats my boat. Let's talk of the score. If you're willing to share some numbers, can you give us some idea of roughly the sorts of turnover that you've experienced that Amazon can produce for you, in at least in the good months, or sort of some kind of number anyway?
Yeah, of course. No, I'm happy to share as many numbers. So last calendar year, we did about $400,000. So to put that into context, we did basically Q4 in 2016. Found that we sold out dead quick because I couldn't replenish the stock as quickly as I needed to. But then that lent on into 2017, where actually $120,000 of that 400 was actually in December alone. Again, a month in which I sold out of stock. So could well have been higher. This year, based on basically a data-driven methodology for looking at last year's performance versus this so far, and scaling factors, we're looking at about $750,000 this year. That, however, I must say that $750,000 is a combination of Europe and USA. But again, that's not a stretch target. That's actually a realistic target. So we could overshoot that, but I'm not going to commit to that just yet.
Okay, so it's a realistic target. So there's some pretty impressive, I've got to take my hat off and say there's some pretty impressive numbers from a standing start. So if you started selling in September 2016, when it's interesting that if you take 1 year as a time, so much about time frame, it's fascinating to me that Jeff Bezos talks about this. He says very explicitly what he's going to do. It always reminds me a bit of, this is a terrible reference to say, so Jeff, don't get the lawyers out if you tell me, but some people just tell you up front what they're going to do and nobody believes them, and then they do it. And that can be terrible. Like Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf in about 1925 when he was imprisoned for starting effectively a riot in Munich, what he was going to do in the Third Reich. And then he basically did it for the next 20 years. So that this is a terrible analogy, except to say it always strikes me that that's crazy because it was out there in printed form and nobody believed it or did anything about it. Jeff Bezos tells people explicitly why he's successful from the top-down strategy perspective. Obviously, there's lots of nuances, but one of them is he thinks in bigger time frames. Now, here's what fascinates me. If you've taken a 6-month snapshot of your process of starting your business, and you started in April 2016.
Yeah.
By whatever, 6 months in, that would have looked like a disaster because nothing happened and you put hours in and spent some money on samples and probably on training. And that looks like a disaster. You go forward 12 months, it looks like maybe just about worth it. You take a 2-year snapshot and you think, oh my God, this guy got launched in 2016. By the following December, he did 120K in 1 month. So that just fascinates me that, by taking a really short-term perspective on things, we sometimes really do ourselves a disservice. Have you got any thoughts on that? I mean, you're sort of 2 years in now.
Yeah, definitely. And it's actually quite an interesting one that I've had a bit of a challenge with again, thankfully to the 10K Collective, because we kind of covered this one. But in essence, I run an order-by-order P&L. So actually my business performance is measured on a 3-monthly basis, which is just about as bad as managing a business on the stock market. So it's quite fraught with actually trying to make that batch of product profitable. I'm not as short-sighted as that quite. I build in the fact that some products might not sell this quarter. Therefore, the expectations in terms of profit might even be a loss, and I'm quite accepting of a loss on a product line for a whole quarter, maybe even 6 months, depending on what the potential in the market is. But actually, through the 10K Collective, they've been making me think a little bit more deeply about that and think about the fact that actually I should be looking at the 12-month view, most definitely across all product launches, and see how much potential I have to. Not hamstring myself too much with products that need to make a profit in a 3-month stretch or even a 6-month stretch. Because in reality, if I can get a product launched in the beginning of the year that's maybe marginally profitable, by Q4, actually what you tend to find is that profit margin ramps up through increased sales volume. So you can't bet on that on January 1st for the following December, but you can use the data to tell you whether that's something that's realistic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the lovely thing about Q4 is that not only do the sales go through the roof, but the profit margin goes up as well, which is a sweet combination, right? So people become so price insensitive when they're desperately shopping and feel that there's all sorts of emotional and social pressures on people, which if you're selling is great. So I have to say, I don't particularly approve of it, if you like, from a sort of sociological perspective, but if you're selling it, it's great. So I think you're absolutely right that to judge a product outside of Q4 particularly is probably, you probably just don't really know what its profit potential is. And the weird thing is all sorts of products have a huge boost at Christmas that you think shouldn't be seasonal around Christmas. I mean, even things like toilet paper or dog poo bags or whatever strange mundane things that people buy seem to have a boost around them, which is odd, but that seems to be how it goes. So yeah, I like your thinking. And also what strikes me always is that the person with the longer term perspective can kill the person with the short term perspective every time. Now that does imply also a bit of money in the bank though. So tell me a bit about the sort of input side of the cash, if you're willing to share some numbers. You don't have to share every chapter and verse, it's your business, but you said you put £8,000 in initially. Have you needed to put more money in to fund it? And you talked about funding sources. What sources have you found, or is it just purely savings?
So yeah, I put 8,000 in to start. Very quickly needed to put more money in. Unfortunately, people don't quite understand the fact that the cash flow issues don't get better; they actually get worse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
which is ridiculous. But it makes complete sense when you see it from a financial perspective. I think end of Q1 last year, I raised some personal finance to push the products forward and get an order raised. But I had a lot of market validation and confidence at that point to be able to utilize that money. Big one for me. This is my secret sauce. I'm pretty damn good at spotting all the 0% credit card deals. I know in previous podcasts, Michael, you've kind of said, if you can't afford to do it, don't do it on a credit card. I completely agree. I wouldn't have done it on a 0% credit card at the beginning or with a brand new product. But if I've got validation of a product and I know I can get sales on it, I'm a lot more comfortable using sort of funding sources like that. And loads of the deals out there at the moment are kind of like 12 and 24 month. So it's quite hedged risk from that perspective. And especially considering the fact that I had at the time that full-time job to support that financing as well was kind of a key aspect of that. You're not going to get a 0% credit card if you say that your job is sitting on the beach with your laptop all day long.
Yeah. I thank you for raising that, because there's a couple of reality checks. One of those hidden factors that people don't say, which you're being honest about, and I think it's important that everyone is clear about. And I try and be really super clear. If I'm going to work with a mentoring client, some lady got in touch with me today and sounds a bit nervous about the whole business model. I'm like, okay, well, look, I want to sit down with you and just really hammer this out, because it may not be for you. And one of the things is cash flow problems get worse, not better, with an inventory-based business as it grows. You need to find more cash to feed the monster. I mean, so it sounds counterintuitive, but for somebody in a day job, that is just alien thinking. And for most people, or even if they've been freelancer selling consulting services and their time for money, effectively, or services. But the other thing is, the chicken and egg thing also is, in order to create an Amazon business which is inventory based and therefore capital hungry, you need a source of capital, and often that is your day job. And also it can underpin lending and other sort of financial security for other people, including your own confidence, which gives you the confidence to take risks. So the irony is that you probably need a day job to start off an Amazon business. And then at some point, you're going to get to the point where it sounds like you're at, actually, where you're crunched between the two. And at some point, you've got to make some decisions. But so tell me a bit more about that funding side of things and your experiences of it so far, or the cash side of things.
The cash. So I got a really kind of pertinent example, because I've actually got my flipboard over here on my left.
Excellent. With a flip chart. Oh, I love flip charts. You know what I'm like.
Unfortunately, my camera is locked to my laptop, so I'd have to disturb everything to show you. But in essence, that flip chart was put together in October last year. And it's kind of left up there as a bit of a kind of war scar, sort of, because I was sat there in a situation where I had successful products, successful business that was kind of bringing in cash. October starting to show signs of the uptick for Q4. Had a relatively decent summer, considering summer isn't the greatest sales time on Amazon or e-commerce for that matter. But the flip chart basically articulates what I wanted to buy to be able to cover myself for January onwards, basically, because my predictions and my numbers were looking like I was going to run out of stock in mid-January. As it turned out, I ran out of stock in mid-December. So that goes to show your predictions are always a little bit undercooked when it comes to inventory. But in essence, I was sat there in a situation where I had tons of inventory ready for Q4 and absolutely no cash in the bank whatsoever. Negative cash in the bank, 0% credit cards, and that type of thing kind of stacking up. And I wasn't going to place another order to put myself further and further in that situation. Now, as November, particularly, I think it was Black Friday kicked in, and I think my payment came in 4 or 5 days after Black Friday, which allowed me to place my order for stock with my supplier. I knowingly placed the order at that point, knowing I was probably going to be out of stock for at least 6 weeks. And as it turned out, I was out of stock for between 8 and 10 weeks, which is most of a quarter for all my top selling products, at least. On the slower selling products, I still had some in stock. But there's a classic example. I was in a situation where I knew the cash was coming. I knew that December was going to be good. Didn't know it was going to be quite as good as it was, $120,000 in 1 month. But in essence, despite knowing that was coming, there was nothing I could do about it. It was like watching a wave coming and just getting swept away by it.
Yeah, frustrating. I think everyone's had that experience, and I don't think that experience goes away, actually. As you said, we've got people in the 10K Collective doing really some very serious numbers and have got very established businesses, but they're always complaining about, they can see that instead of making 250,000 a month, they can be making 500,000 or even more if they just had the cash to fund the inventory. And it's not a question of not being able to make sales. It's a question of how fast you can grow based on the return, the speed of money, really, the speed of how fast you get paid back. So yeah, it's a very interesting point, but it's a quality problem to have in a lot of ways, but it is a problem. And I think people don't tend to think about it in a very grown up way because they come from a day job perspective where your relationship to money, I guess you don't even realize it, do you? You as a manufacturing expert, you may have realized this, but for me, my relationship to money, I didn't even realize that there was another relationship to it until you start to sell physical products and you realize that there is a whopping difference between cash flow and profit and loss. Like they have almost nothing to do with each other. In fact, the more you sell, the more profit you make, the bigger cash flow problem you have, which is just the opposite to a day job, right? So yeah, it's just a surreal thing. And I'm really, really pleased you talked about that in such articulate terms, because it is a thing that you've just got to get to grips with, is that if we're building a business, you are building, you're mostly building the thing and putting money and effort into it. Now, most people sort of start with the idea they'll put, a few grand maybe into it and a few months, and then that's it. They're going to sit back on the beach. So so those people who are listening, what would your key messages be if that's somebody listening and that's kind of where they're at, if they're honest with themselves?
For me, the key thing that constantly brings a reality back to what it is you're doing is modeling it. And you're not going to know exact numbers and you're not going to know certainties, but at least by modeling something in Excel that shows, well, actually, if I have 3 products, these are the approximate costs. This is when those costs might land. This is how how that cash might come back into the business. Model it out over a 12-month period, just to give yourself a bit of an insight into, actually, yeah, the profit margin says I'm doing 20%, but in July I'm 50 grand in debt in the bank. How does that work? And if you just say the numbers in a podcast like this, people go, how can that be? How can that be the case? If I'm making profit, how can I not have money? And it's not just on a podcast. It happened at the 10K Collective. Everyone turned to me and said, so, are you paying yourself? I was like, no, but you're making profit. Yeah, loads of it. So it's just, but everyone in the 10K Collective gets that. You're making loads of profit, but you're not seeing any money, and that is a problem. But yeah, in terms of getting back to basics and actually teaching yourself this stuff, because we're not all accountants, we're not finance experts, but you can put together a quick cash flow forecast. Download a Google Sheet template or an Excel template of a cash flow forecast and play with the numbers. Just let yourself have a go and understand the problems that could occur. That would be my number one shout, and that might be because I'm quite data driven, but
quite. I think, yeah. I mean, you have even by the standards of the 10K Collective, where there are a lot of very savvy business people now. You're definitely data driven, but nevertheless, I think if you're not a data driven person, I've realized recently, and I've been working with a business partner for a while now. He's very data driven. He's got a physics degree. In fact, he's literally in astrophysics. Background is literally rocket science. Sometimes if I say it ain't rocket science, he knows what rocket science is, but I've realized that actually if you're not massively competent with that, the thing to do is get somebody involved who is, because you've got to have that data side to things. Also, there are other sides, there are multiple sides to businesses. And what I would say is, if you're not a data person, work with somebody who gets the numbers. You could work with a coach who gets it in a simple sort of level, and I certainly can do cash flow projections, but sometimes you just need to employ an expert, like, go to your accountant and spend a bit of money and a bit of time with an expert to see if this business model is even going to work for you. And I think that's a very good reality check. And I think people can be very reluctant to spend money on expert guidance when actually it's not very much relative to the money you stand to lose or the misery you stand to experience. Yeah. Wrong. I'd say, hire an accountant or go and find somebody who's done this before, or somebody who knows how to work a spreadsheet if you're not very good with that, and go, can you just do this for me? I'll pay you an amount of money, and then I want you to explain it to me in terms a child, a 5-year-old could understand. And I mean, that's what I do with my accountant, by the way. I'm no different.
Yeah, so, I was reluctant to say it was my X factor when we were talking about X factors earlier, but my wife is actually, if I'm data driven, she is extremely data driven. She's we've worked in the same industries and everything in the past, and her particular strand is inventory and logistics, essentially. But she's very, very capable on a financial and commercial perspective. So I kind of do what she would refer to as fag packet, what most people would refer to as detail, and then she goes and does the detail. But what she quickly realised in 2017 was my fag packet was probably as good as her detail anyway.
That's the thing. And the final thing I would say about any sort of projections into the future is to account for the fact that there is uncertainty. And this is what I would say to anyone who's listening. So this episode is primarily geared to people who are just starting out, and we'll do a more advanced episode as well in a second. But actually, there's quite a lot of advanced thinking, but hopefully at a digestible level that Ashley's come up with. But one thing I would say is, if it looks bad on the back of a fag packet, as you put it, or the back of an envelope, as I prefer to say, not endorsing smoking on this show, but it's not going to look better on a spreadsheet. It'll look worse, and then reality will be worse again. So in other words, for example, if you think you can sell a product for $20 and the best price you can get for it is $8, and by the time you've sold it on Amazon and you're paying $5 per product averages on pay-per-click, that you're making $3 profit. If that's what it looks like on the back of an envelope, when you do your spreadsheet and you account for 20 cents per unit inspection cost in China, and then a bit of import duty you'd forgotten about, and then, we better get it inspected in America the first time. So even if we average that across 2 or 3 orders where we don't get it inspected, that brings the price down. It's going to look worse. And then once you put it in the market, there'll be something else, and it'll look worse again. So I would say that my rule of thumb is always, if it looks bad on an envelope, don't bother with the spreadsheet, because it's going to be worse, and therefore just move on to the next opportunity, of which there are many.
Exactly. No, that's exactly, and that's been my perspective. I have kind of an envelope calculator, and then the more detailed one that runs my business, essentially. But you're right. It just amplifies things when you take it to the detail.
Great. So Ashley, thank you very much for the thoughts. For those who are just starting out, either those who are literally just actually starting to sell stuff right now, or who are working towards that, what's the one piece of advice that you wish you had received back in 2016 when you were working towards your first launch, or just making your first launch?
So I feel like it was in contradiction to one of my first comments on the podcast, implement at the speed of thought. I didn't do that. And one of the pieces of advice that I ignored didn't ignore, but didn't take quite as seriously as I should have, was finding a community. I found a lot of Facebook groups, and I thought that was the right thing. But kind of, I was reading a book at the time called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And they talk a lot about the mastermind principle in there. And this wasn't a setup or a kind of supposed to be a pitch for the 10K Collective, or any mastermind for that matter. But very fundamentally, that's the piece of advice that I feel like any newbie getting into it, especially now, needs to be concentrating on. Back when I joined Facebook groups, we were probably 2,000 to 3,000 people in a Facebook group. Now we're talking about 20 to 30, maybe even 60,000 people in a Facebook group. A lot of them talking absolute rubbish. And I'm not afraid to say it. I would say 98.2% of them are talking rubbish. in relation to a figure that we've been quoted about the number of accounts that were closed after 12 months. Lots of those people just aren't the right people to be talking to. But you get yourself in a room with real connection with real people, you're learning at 10 times the pace because everyone is learning from each other. And that, for me, could have prevented a lot of problems that I had in 2017 with inventory, cash, product development, everything. And thankfully, I did eventually sign up to the mastermind. So I've overcome a number of those problems and kind of started to move a lot quicker. But that's my piece of advice to anyone who's looking at it fresh and brand new.
Thanks, Ashley. Well, I've just got to say as well that I didn't ask Ashley to do anything like that. And of course, it's lovely to get an endorsement of something I'm involved in. But honestly, it's that way around for a reason anyway. I don't really run the 10K Collective as a highly profitable thing. It's very hard work running something that's in person and trying to get entrepreneurs in the same place is a bit like herding cats. But the reason I do it is because I personally experienced as an entrepreneur how incredibly important it's been to me to have a group of people. So I practiced what I preached. In fact, I've been a member probably of a mastermind for about 18 months before I set one up. So yeah, I'd agree with you. I mean, from my personal perspective, in a way, it doesn't matter who's you join as long as you're careful about who you hang out with. But I agree. And also isolation is a dream killer, I think, is the other thing I would say on the back of that. And like being stuck behind a laptop all day is not a great way to keep your motivation and your mojo for building a business, which can have major challenges. I mean, I just think connection is everything in this game. And I don't care whose mastermind you join or whatever form you go, you do it for free. You join something for $25,000 a month or whatever. There are crazily expensive masterminds out there, but I'd absolutely endorse that. So Ashley, thank you for that piece of wisdom. I cannot but agree. And thank you very much for sharing your Desert Island Discs with all the Amazon sellers out there. And if you're listening up and you're a more advanced seller and you want some more exciting expansionist views of Amazon and how to scale up quickly, stay tuned for Ashley's next episode with me where we're going to plunge into that.
Thank you very much, Michael.